And Lisa's joining us this morning. So good morning all and welcome to our Rotary Eco Club. Let me share my screen for a few brief announcements as we get started. So our meeting format today, of course, is on Zoom, but it's an interactive format. We welcome you to use the chat to participate, even as our speakers are giving us a wonderful tour of what they do here in Shawnigan Lake. So we warmly welcome our guests from the Shawnigan Basin Society. We have Bernie, Ed, and Dave with us on the call, as well as Dave Hutchinson, I believe, from the group. And we also would like to gratefully acknowledge the traditional custodians of this place we share, Juurlink, the Hokuminum speaking peoples who hunted and gathered in this area. We respect their caring connections to each other and the places where we live, work, and play. Every time our Rotary Club does an international presentation, we gratefully acknowledge the work of the Basin Society in our midst, that we are so blessed to be able to connect with our community-based environmental stewards for land and water use. We talk about some of the issues that Shawnigan faces. This slide I thought captured just a very quick one for our international guests, that we're to be water wise, we watch out for those invasive plants, and we respect the riparian areas around our lake. We also talk about some of the big issues that loom over our community, such as the illegal soil dumping, and yet the resilience and the spirit of our residents and our private schools and everyone who wants to save our lake. So here in Shawnigan, we're also very excited to promote our upcoming Community Cleanup Day and the fact that we have so many keen and enthusiastic participants each time, and they look after 25 zones around the lake that tend to collect litter. So thank you to everyone who's thinking of participating, and we're looking to have even more engagement and sponsor involvement. And we have a spot on our website where you can follow up with us. And around the community, we'll be posting these signs with the link to our website so that people can quickly at a glance understand where to find more information. So together with the Shawnigan Basin Society, we hope to inspire as people of action. So we look forward to hearing from you today. And we're always growing. So if you know someone who would be a good fit for our club, as you can see, we have a lot of gardeners in our midst and also people with a number of different skills that just make life fun. And so we're looking to grow together and to serve to change lives. So thank you again for being with us today. Please follow us online. We have many different ways to connect, including after this presentation. You'll find it at the Shawnigan Rotary YouTube channel. There's our Facebook page, Instagram, our Twitter. And this allows us to connect, like I said, internationally with other Rotary clubs and to be able to share ideas and best practices. So thank you very much. And a warm welcome once again to our guests, Bernie, Ed, Dave, and Dave, I believe. Welcome.
Yes. Thank you.
And I will make you a co-host, whoever is talking first, so that you can share your screen if you would like.
I think that would be our president, Dave.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, no, I wanted to let you know we've been engaged in a process with it's actually as a strategic partner with the CVRD. And this was to address some of the issues, historically, the Basin Society had a firm relationship with the CVRD and actually had funding from that organization. We still actually have a Function 488, which could provide funding to the Basin Society, but it's been zero funded now for, I guess we're going into 4 years. So during that 4-year period, you might recall there was a moratorium, or at least what do they call it when they have the election plus a question. They had basically asked about whether people would want to pay more taxes to fund a drinking water and watershed protection function. And it passed the majority of people in the CVRD voted that they wanted that function. So originally it was scheduled to provide about $750,000 a year to the CVRD, and that actually covered wages to a certain extent, wages, and as well as hard costs, things like water quality, monitoring, analytical costs, that sort of thing. So it's been 4 years now, I think, since, well, actually more like 3, I guess. So we're going into the 3rd year where they're still trying to get traction on that function, because they've been trying to hire the person that they want to lead that function. And they had one person hired, and they ended up moving on to a job in the province after a month. And so they're still looking. Meanwhile, part of that function was to establish strategic partnerships with various groups in the CVRD to help out, because they recognize the value of volunteer workers. And so we put together a proposal to develop a watershed management plan with the CVRD. And that was accepted, and they gave us a contract, essentially, which we're still working on, actually. And so we have put together a watershed management plan. Obviously, it's the property of the CVRD, so we can't distribute it. Since we've been working on that, and they realized that it was a lot of work for the value of the contract they had given us, that they've foreshortened the document, and they're now calling it the Shawnigan Lake Water Characterization Document, which was fine with us. I mean, we don't know what their intentions are in the future, but we did and do want to have a management plan, a complete management plan for the watershed, which basically is designed to give everybody, it's a public document, it's designed to give everybody connection to regulations, both, federal, provincial, local government regulations. It gives guidance on things like, originally our concept was that it would also include First Nations objectives. And along with that, there's archaeological considerations that, should be in any watershed management plan. And generally with archaeology, you're basically, they don't map archaeological sites, but you can contact, there is a contact within the government so if you're looking at, say, developing property, they will be able to tell you whether there are any concerns or not. So that's, that basically you would be able to go to that watershed management plan and get that information. So as I said, it's a work in progress. The document's been foreshortened. We'll probably submit it on its final round next week, I'm hoping. And then we'll see where the CVRD wants to move on to. What I thought I could share with you, and it's really just a view of the outline of the document, so you can see what a watershed management plan has in it, if that's doable. I'll just do a share screen. I've got it here as a Word document.
So Dave, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So is this then the extension of the conservation plan that you guys commissioned?
It will encompass it, and I will show you that within this management plan. What Steve's referring to is the work done by Herb Hosson under Silva, and it's an ecosystem-based conservation plan, and that is the heart of this management plan. Looks at establishing what Herb had outlined in that document. So basically, green belt areas interconnected, so that wildlife has pathways. This is the basic, keeping in mind that this document is the result, or this outline is the result of our discussions with CVRD. It does not have the First Nations component in it and the archaeological component in it, which we felt it should have, and it could have. These management plans are dynamic documents. They don't just sit on a shelf. You pull them out and you adjust them. So if you look at, it's basically got the objectives of watershed management. Governing principles would refer to sort of the mandates of the various governments. Then it looks at the legislation section. So there's, there's, as I mentioned, the 3 levels of legislation. Then you look at the environmental setting, and this is essentially the section of the document that CVRD has isolated and asked us to complete on, and called it, and they're calling it the watershed characterization. So it's very detailed. I won't go into the detail of the document, but you can see all the different components of it. Groundwater, we've actually included a section in here as well for fisheries. That was one thing that was left out in the scheme of things. So you've got land use, water use. So you start to get an idea from this section of what is in the watershed. And then the document goes on to look at activities in the watershed and what those might result in the way of negative effects. So you've got urbanization, agriculture, all these have various effects on the watershed. There's a section there on maintaining water balance. One of the key things in environmental work, we're realizing now that the watershed is a very good unit for environmental management. And within the watershed, it's all about water balance. You've got to have the water that you need in order for all the ecosystems to work properly, including the human ecosystem. So then once you know what you've got in the watershed, then it moves into a monitoring of that. You make predictions, and then you monitor and see if those predictions hold true. Is the water quality maintaining, or is it deteriorating? You have to have a regular water quality monitoring program. Aquatic habitat, again, we're doing a fair bit of that ad hoc now, looking at, for instance, Taylor Park. Kim, you've been involved, you were out to see that. That's the type of habitat monitoring that we need to do more of, because then we can tell, we can come out and say unequivocally, yes, we've been in those streams and we've seen coho salmon in the spring. We're doing that. In fact, Bernie's and company are going out there. Ed was out there this week looking for salmon fry. So it's very critical that we prove, in essence, that Taylor Park is salmon habitat. So, and then we get into a recommendation section. I'm just going to move my, I'm just going to move that over there. Now let's see here. Yeah. I'll just flip down here to the recommend. You can see all the content of the document. This is an interesting, this is the crux of maintaining the function of the watershed. It's all tied into this water cycle. So
Dave, would it be possible to go full width on your document page? Just for view. If not, don't worry about it.
Yeah. I should be able to do that, shouldn't I?
I think it might be under view. I'm not sure.
Yeah, and view is hidden, unfortunately, because I can't get at it.
Okay.
Unless I can move that.
I see it in your menu at the top. And once again, I apologize for interrupting.
Yeah, no worries. I can't get at it. You can see it, but I can't. Oh, there it is, view. Here we go. Shouldn't that?
Where it says page width, I think that should work for us.
Page width. Okay, yeah, let's do that. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, good. Now I gotta put things back where they were. Anyway, this is a very good graphic depiction of the types of processes that we need to quantify. Bernie's gone to great extent to characterize the groundwater systems, the wells, all the water that's used within the watershed. we have to develop a working model to establish what volumes that we have both as rainfall in the watershed, where it ends up. Obviously, we're trying to keep groundwater systems recharged, and there are ways of doing that. You don't have to totally depend on natural processes. We can augment groundwater if we know where augmentation is required. So anyway, I just wanted to show you, so we get down to the recommendation section. This is all monitoring. And then the recommendations. So there you can see the first recommendation is we're looking at Herb's work, Silva Ecosystem Consultants. I should spell that correctly, I guess. Anyway, it's based on green belts. Also, the Shawnigan Basin Society works closely with BCCI, which is the BC Collegiate Institute.
Coalition, I think.
Coalition, yes, Institute. So, and Mira Ziolo is a wildlife biologist. She's actually, I think, a veterinarian by practice. And she's identified that there are issues of, and in fact, COVID-19 is an example of a pathogen that has moved from wildlife into the human scenario. So it behooves us to be very clear on what wildlife requirements there are in the watershed and how to meet those. And part of Herb's work in the ecosystem modeling exercise is these green belt connections between green belt areas so that wildlife can move without interference from humans. And then it just goes through a list. We haven't completed this section, obviously, but this is the type of information that ultimately there's lots that we don't know about in the watershed, and we need to put together the studies to gain that information and provide guidance to the CVRD in that respect. That we do know somewhat about fish and fish habitat, but for instance, we don't know whether they're coho fry are utilizing Taylor Park. We don't know of the 7,000 plus fish that the Mill Bay and District Conservation Society moved into the system, exactly where those fish have gone and where the coho fry are rearing. And that's the type of information that we can collect as volunteers, and it goes a long ways towards protecting those resources. And one of the things I know, certainly Gordy and Karen are involved with the rail trail, being in close proximity to it. And one of the issues there is riparian encroachment on the, riparian impacts from the development of a trail, if the trail is developed on the west side of the tracks as intended. And the underlying legislation, because of all the coho that are currently in the Shawnigan Lake system, it brings into play the federal regulations, because the feds are very much focused on salmon and salmon bearing waters. So by virtue of this salmon enhancement project that the Mill Bay Conservation Group has done, now we can appeal to the federal government, and their legislation applies to the lake. So those are the kinds of things that we, just an example as one of the recommendations on any watershed management plan, but specifically the Shawnigan Lake Watershed Management Plan, will be to preserve all riparian zones, because the lake is almost fully developed, and a lot of the development area, the riparian zones have been severely impacted. So those that remain are critical to maintain the habitat. So I think it's something that's, it will be a fairly large document, but it will go a long ways for people that need specific information. You don't have to read it from cover to cover. It will address the situations that you come up with and tell you what the regulatory environment is like and where to go for help. So I think that's a critical role that this document is intended to play. But whether, like I said, it's been foreshortened to a descriptive document at this point, descriptive of the watershed's characteristics. And we want to push on in one form or another. We want to push on to make it a management plan, which is an action plan for the watershed. So I don't want to belabor the document. As I said, it's done in conjunction with the CVRD. We're just finishing up the foreshortened document, and then we'll be in discussions with them to see where they want to go from there. So at that point, I'll just go back to the group.
Dave, you mentioned Herb Hammond. I just saw that briefly in the references there. So which organization is he connected with?
He is a consultant. He's an ecoforestry specialist, as I understand it. Now, certainly, I've read books that he's done on ecoforestry. He did originally, the background for the Shawnigan Basin Society was it was originally formed by Bruce Fraser, who was the Area B director. And it was intended to be a connection to the community for this type of information, environmental conservation information. And around, I believe it was 2015, that's the document date, he retained Silva Ecosystem Consultants, which is Herb's group, to do this document. And I think it was over $100,000 actually to produce the document that Herb came up with. And some at the time thought that was excessive, that we shouldn't be spending that kind of money. I wasn't involved with the group at the time, so I'm only going by what people have told me. But in any event, subsequent to finishing that document, we've shared that document with the Coxsila working group, and they've in turn put together an ecosystem-based plan for the Coxsila watershed. And right now, this document, this watershed management plan, is a way to operationalize what Herb did for us, this information that he pulled together. Obviously, it would suggest that forestry should be conducted differently than it is, than the clear cutting that's occurring now. But I don't know whether you got the latest newsletter from Mosaic, but basically they're looking at setting aside, I think it was 40,000 hectares of old growth forest to serve the function of what a mature forest is supposed to serve in terms of ecosystem preservation. So, and they didn't say that they said it was for 25 years and possibly longer. So I think the move is afoot. We're starting to realize that, the way forestry is conducted now is not ideal from the point of view of preserving ecosystem functions. And I don't want to steal Bernie's thunder, because I guess, Bernie, you've got a talk coming up on April 13th, next Wednesday. And that talk is to go into the details of carbon systems. So we'll get a better, I'm assuming, Bernie, will get a better view of forestry and what potential impacts it might be having on climate.
A bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I don't know whether you had any questions, but basically we want to forge ahead. I'm waiting. I can't really say what direction we'll take, but I think that if the CVRD doesn't want to move ahead in the direction that we want to go, then we may very well just proceed and produce the watershed management plan, which would then include archaeology and First Nation issues to our best ability. I mean, the problem is always that communication. We have a working relationship with Malahat First Nation. But they're quite frank and they're saying, if you want us to help work on something, we need funding. So we're constantly on the search. I think we need to find a grant program that we could direct towards doing that report, finishing it off, and incorporating First Nation issues in it. That would be my preference.
I'm just looking for the link for your talk, Bernie. Would it be in the Shawnigan Basin Society email newsletter, I wonder? And I see Lori has a question, so she's next. I'll look for the link. Please put it in the chat if you find it.
Okay.
Hey, Dave. I just have a couple of questions about the, oops, my clock is telling me it's 8:30, sorry. Okay. Riparian monitoring. Is the Basin Society involved in that? Because what I see on the lake is very disturbing in that people are coming in and they're just ripping out every bit of riparian in places around the lake. And it's not just taking out a select area, it's their entire width of their property.
Yeah.
I contacted the CVRD last year about some clearing in a W4 zone and really got nowhere, went to fisheries, went to RAP, and basically every one of them said, well, we don't have a boat to get there. And we happily offered to take them by boat, but then the next excuse was, no, legally we have to go with the RCMP or have our own boat. So that pretty much means that nothing's ever going to happen, but it's disappearing at an alarming rate around the lake, especially with people who are buying. So I just wondered, is that in part of your purview? Because it should be in somebody's purview.
Yeah, no, well, we're Riparian is the basic working block for ecosystem preservation. So yes, we're acutely aware of the need for preservation of what riparian zone remains.
Right.
That's why we definitely came out of the chalks on the Shawnigan Village Rail Trail phase 3, because that alone would account for the removal of something I think we calculated in the order of 16,000 square meters of riparian zone, which is untenable.
A lot of that along that path on the waterfront is already destroyed in terms of riparian as well. Like they all have beaches. And would you not think, this is a question back to you again, would you not think the CVRD would be watching? I mean, it occurs to me they wouldn't do anything that would be against the riparian in their plan.
Well, we have found that not to be the case, actually, that we are in discussion, I think is probably the appropriate term, with them on both the rail trail and now with Taylor Park. Taylor Park is, unless you've taken a close look at it, I would recommend it. I think you're going out there later today, aren't you, Bernie?
Tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
Tomorrow at 2. Yeah, they're having a naturalist group come in and document the area, but their intention with Taylor Park is to basically turn it into a parking lot for Kinsel Trestle. Right. It is an incredibly valuable habitat, wetland habitat, and it runs year-long, according to Sean Taylor. I can't attest to that personally, but it does run. We did go out there, what was that, 3 weeks ago, and we did find a salmon red right in the area that they're talking about developing. So the salmon, the coho again, they come into the lake, come up that West Arm Inlet, and they're spawning along in that tributary to the lake. So all of that should be, have a 15 to 30 meter riparian zone associated with it. It should be zero development. If we want to preserve what remains of the systems, we need to enforce the riparian. The problem is the Riparian area regulation, riparian area protection regulation is a provincial regulation. The province, though, has downloaded the responsibility for that regulation to the local government. So you talk to the province about something under the riparian area protection regulation, and they won't take action on it. The local government is not taking action on it either. Again, getting back to the feds, because the federal government has the Fisheries Act, which is a very strong regulation, and it applies to salmon bearing waters, freshwater. It applies to marine conditions and all marine conditions, but it applies to salmon bearing freshwater conditions as well. And that's what our lake system is. So we need to depend and make those connections with the federal government. And that's what the Basin Society is attempting to do, is make those connections, do the monitoring, get the regulators involved. We're as frustrated as everyone else is on the lake, though, because we'll report an obvious infraction and we'll get the same response. It's sort of a finger pointing exercise.
Absolutely.
And no one is taking that responsibility. That's why if we get a management plan and we could, identify whose responsibility is, we can just point at the plan and say, look, this is your legislation. This is your problem. Let's get some action happening here, because this is not going to help. This is damaging our ecosystems here, and we want to preserve them. So
It is. And it's funny because some people get nailed. I have friends who had to replant their foreshore and they were fined. But what's going on now is like just the Wild West.
it is exactly that. And one of the big issues with Shawnigan Lake is the fact that Mosaic owns the bottom of the lake. And so therefore it becomes, unlike other freshwater systems, it becomes a little, which by the way, the feds own the bottom of the lake in most cases, right? So therefore the feds and the Fisheries Act apply. But when Mosaic owns the bottom of the lake, and that's probably up to the natural boundary, it makes a very cloudy situation. I've talked to Mosaic about this, and they would just as soon not own it. They have it has no value to them. It used to be because of they had a log dump where the West Provincial Park was, and they used to use the lake for log transport. So it made sense, I guess, for somebody to give them the bottom of the lake. But now they'd like to get rid of it because it's a liability for them, really. So that's something we could maybe collectively corner them on at some point and just see if we couldn't get the CVRD to accept that responsibility or give it back to the feds as far as that goes.
Or the province. I understand that the province owns most of the lakes in British Columbia, even ones that are surrounded by private land.
Now, is that right? Okay, well, I don't know what the basis for that is. Without any government interference, the feds have jurisdiction. So obviously somebody in the province has decided they wanted to gain that ownership and responsibility, and probably make a good story at some point to find out how that happened and when it happened.
And my second question, sorry to be a pest, but is the Weir. So you have a nice picture of the water cycle, but the Weir is, I understand it's there for a reason, but it absolutely affects the natural water cycle when we see it go up and down every year. And is that a concern for your group? Because naturally the lake, let's say pre-Weir, would have had its own rhythm, and that's no longer the case.
Yeah, no, it's true. I don't know. Do you want to try that one, Bertie? Have you got?
Well, the Weir was established to ensure there's enough volume in the lake for the various water utilities.
I understand. Yeah.
But we think it should be used to regulate flow in the lower Shawnigan Creek so that there's adequate water for the all the creatures that use the creek throughout the dry months.
Yeah.
And that's really not happening. Very often, the creek practically dries out in summer.
Right.
So, countering the efforts of the Mill Bay and District Conservation Society salmon program.
One thing that we're really active in, Lori, is one of the big problems is that a lot of debris goes down the river, and during the the atmospheric river events and what have you, the large
Right.
storms, the Weir is actually totally submerged. It's no longer providing that hydraulic resistance that's causing the lake to increase. It's actually caused by the restrictions in the stream flow. And our point is we should have total debris removal on the upside of the road at Masons, so that stuff is not going down and plugging up the stream. We need the stream to be rather unrestricted so that the lake doesn't pile up the way it is right now. And so, yeah, and I agree with Bernie. We need to regulate this. It's the rule curve. That's what they use
Yes.
for the dam. And the rule curve needs to accommodate, and always, my experience in working with BC Hydro and what have you, they establish a rule curve based on the maintenance of core habitat function in the lower system. That's basically, BC Hydro has to stop generating power when the reservoir gets down to a certain point, because they need the rest of that water to maintain lower river function.
Right.
So we should, on a smaller scale, we should have a rule curve for that Weir that during the summer months that we do maintain that lower river. And of course, what that could mean is the lake would go lower than it currently is.
But that was what it did naturally anyway. I mean, we have a natural beach on our property, and there, I have pictures back from the 50s and 60s where there was 20 feet of beach. Now we might in a summer see, 4 feet of beach.
Yeah.
It's quite a significant difference.
Well, then we should, based on that history, I think we should press ahead, and we are pressing for a rule curve, as Bernie indicated, to preserve fisheries habitat, which
yes,
that's a big deal. I mean, all the efforts of Ken Gray and his volunteers to put these salmon up into the system, it all goes for naught if the salmon die in the lower river because of the temperature. That's what happens, of course, is the stream stops flowing, the fish are in pools, the temperature increases. For coho, I think it's 22 degrees. Once it's above that, their lifetime is limited, right? And it'll kill them. So yeah, so that's one of our main objectives, is to try to get that rule curve modified, which would take the lake lower. And as you say, that only exposes more beaches, which probably enhances the recreational aspect of the lake rather than detracts from it. So.
Okay, thank you. Sorry to take up so much space.
No worries. I don't know whether you saw the Northwest Hydraulics report, Lori, that I should send you I will send you the link to that report. It's interesting to look at because it establishes the flood level, which is the 200-year event in the lake.
Right.
And it's interesting to see where that is. You can see your property and see whether it's inundated or not.
Yeah, well, we had to follow that when we built, but clearly a lot of people don't these days when they're building.
And, based on what happened last November, I don't think that's a one-off deal. I think we're going to see more. That climate change is basically, we're going to be having warmer, wetter winters. And that's just going to mean there's these storms keep coming.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Just getting back to a little while ago in terms of the CVRD having the best interest in terms of riparian considerations in mind. their parks department is more concerned with recreation than they are with environmental concerns. They don't really have the depth of expertise within the parks department, I don't think. And you see that evidenced with Taylor Park. And I'm not totally conversant with all the issues around the rail trail, but I think that may be apparent there as well. But going back several years to when Herb Hammond was involved with the Basin Society, I was also involved with it then as well. And the problem was with his ecosystem-based conservation plan, I think there's a lot of good information in there. In fact, Herb, he continued on to do the work for Coxsila, and I think currently he's involved with the Bamfield First Nations, I forget their name, up near Anakla. So he's still quite favorably regarded in his field, and he does good work. However, when it comes to implementing his recommendations, the problem that we had in Shawnigan, especially when it gets to dealing with the forest companies and the CVRD, the largest landholders are the privately managed forest lands. And of course, there's no, Herb's work was not relevant to them. They didn't want to incorporate his recommendations into how they use their lands. And when it comes to the CVRD in terms of the planning department and making recommendations for development, there was no authorization from the Basin Society in terms of recommendations. We did work with the CVRD at that point to try and integrate that plan with regard to planning recommendations through the Advisory Planning Commission, but it didn't really materialize. So there's just problems with authority and multiple regulatory entities in this whole process that need to be resolved still.
Yeah, well, welcome to government.
Yeah.
That's why I think that we have to show the way. And when it comes to private lands and forestry, I mean, where did they get those lands from, right? A lot of it was given to them by way of getting around the issues with the United States on stumpage fees, right? So they ended up allocating the private lands to the forest companies.
Well, it all I think evolved originally from the ENN land grant for the South Vancouver Island area. And I think that's why a lot of the lakes are owned by the forest companies, the bottom of the lake, so including Shawnigan. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we know what's required in order to have an environmentally sustainable and functioning watershed. And we just have to put that on paper, and it's undeniable. And
but again, I think we need to somehow encourage the CVRD to acknowledge the recommendations of all this work that the Basin Society is doing. So
yeah,
agreed. And we hope our recording today will amplify this work in the background. But also, I'd like to ask about citizen science, because it seems to me that there has to be a way to connect this to the community, whether it's at the school level or people like us that are very keen to learn more. So what would you say?
If I could interject. So one of the discussions I'm involved in is to develop a map of the ecological assets within this CVRD, particularly the South Cowichan Valley. And we're trying to get together all groups interested in the ecological health. And so, so one of the suggestions from the Cowichan Valley naturalists is that we should have a good survey of wetlands. And I think this would make a wonderful citizen science project, that if we could get a meeting of all interested parties, or at least a representative of all the interested parties, and then set about a plan on actually mapping the wetlands we have. And we can start as a basis with the IMAP BC, where they have mapped ecologically sensitive areas. And I don't know how accurate that mapping is, but it leaves out a lot of known riparian areas and known wetlands. So I think it would be interesting to get a group together to actually map all the known wetlands within the South Cowichan anyway.
Fantastic. Anyone else have a question for our guests?
Well, and for citizen science, the Coxsila Watershed Group has connected with, I always forget his name, but with a hydrologist at the University of Victoria, and last summer was engaged in monitoring at multiple sites in all the creeks that flow into the lower Coxsila, monitoring depth of water, stream flow or absence of stream flow, temperature, conductivity, to try to get a handle on whether this water is coming from groundwater or surface water, and the absence or presence of fish. So, and that was being monitored by members of the Coxsila Watershed Group. And I was also involved in that monitoring. So there, that it would be nice to do something equivalent in the Shawnigan Creek watershed.
Yeah, yeah, we really do need to know where the fish are, what is fisheries habitat. A lot of it is by definition anyway, because it flows into the lake, and
Yeah.
so therefore it is fisheries habitat. But
It would be nice to know whether fish are actually present or not.
yeah,
Through the Rotary groups, we also have access to some of the success stories that have happened up island. So in the Campbell River area, they helped coordinate a team of divers to search the bottom of McIver Lake and to be able to bring out trash during their cleanup events. And I believe that was connected to the Rotary clubs up north, but I can find out more information because I think that could be a service where we could also help with.
yeah. One thing I want to make you aware of for that cleanup is that we were approached by a group of divers. I'm sorry, I don't have the notice, but it was via our director's email, and they're looking for involvement in the cleanup. So it'd be great if we could figure out an underwater area that we want to include
Yes.
for cleanup, and then we can get them involved in that.
Yes, my understanding is anywhere between Masons and the government wharf is prime territory. It's not as deep, and it's definitely where the people have been.
Yeah, no, that'd be a good idea. Okay, well, I'll respond to that group and just indicate that it's the 23rd, and
We have a comprehensive document I can forward to you that lists all the event details, like the step-by-step. We had to
Yeah.
map it all out for the authorities.
yeah, if you could, that'd be
Yeah,
great.
it's
Then I can
also available
forward
at our
it on.
website, but I'll send it to you.
Okay.
Awesome. See, this is the kind of collaboration in this organic discussion. If we're each operating in our silos, we can't help each other, right? So this is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also going to put a link in the chat. So Rotary has extended this citizen science project. It's basically a video-based proposals is what it is, but it's called I Fix the Planet.com. And so they're inviting people around the world, ordinary citizens like you and I, to propose whatever it is they see in their community and to do a short video burst just to talk about that or to illustrate that if you have those video skills. And I have to say, last year, the Rotary Club of Sydney here on the island placed in the top 3 worldwide for their proposal, which was simply to educate the youth in their community about things they can practically do to have a positive impact on the environment. So it was a youth-focused outreach. And guys, in Shawnigan, like, we are so blessed to have 2 very responsible private school communities that really want to be involved. And I know that we'll see them at our cleanup. So let's reach out and think of creative ways to tell these stories so that people feel empowered.
So
Sounds great, Kim. If I can say a couple of things here. So just to kind of review what's been said here, I actually invited you guys, the Shawnigan Basin Society, here today for me to get a little bit of an overview of what has been done so far in our community. And so you guys were on the top of my list to invite you because you're sort of the main organization in creating this overview of the character of our basin, as well as the condition of our basin, right? What the situation is right now. So one of the main questions that I had after reading the conservation plan was, how has this plan been received by the CVRD as well as by the community? And so it sounds to me like that you're still, I don't know when the conservation plan was done. Was it in 2015 or something? Or?
Yeah, 2015 is the finish date
So we're
on it.
7 years later. It sounds to me like you're still struggling to convince the CVRD of implementing any kind of conservation efforts in our community. Am I correct in assessing that right now?
Yeah, I don't want to speak poorly of the good people in the local government, but in terms of the way the CVRD is organized, we've often commented amongst ourselves that they have a board, they have 15 members on the board, and the board is to provide direction to the staff. So you have all these functions and all these staff members that work on the functions, and the board should be overseeing that and providing direction. But we perceive there's a bit of a disconnect between the staff, who basically, they come up with what they want to do and they do it, and the guidance that the board provides. It's frustrating. We know, of course, most of the directors. One of our members, Cliff Evans, is very well known. He goes to every CVRD meeting, obviously virtually these days, but they know we're here. And Cliff would be the first one to tell you that that the staff really basically are not, it's not working the way it was intended, where the board provides direction and the staff provides the activity. There's things that just like because the regulations have all been downloaded to the CVRD, they, as the regional government, they should be, enforcing the riparian area protection regulation, which they aren't really. I mean, they're obviously their projects are working in direct opposition to that regulation. So it's something that's, and going back in history, there've been lots of discussions, and sure, Dave, you probably heard this before, that, is incorporation the answer to that? Is the incorporation of Shawnigan Lake a way that we could maybe get more of our input and the direction that we would like to go in, listened to by those in charge? It's tough. I'm not a political person, so I don't know whether having being incorporated as the Shawnigan Lake would improve things or not. But clearly I won't call it the failings of government. It's just the amount that the government has to do and the resources they have to do it, they just don't match. Unfortunately, there's just, it happens in every sphere.
I think
that incorporation issue, that's another one that's just been spinning for many years. And it doesn't seem like there's going to be a quick solution. One thing I recommended years ago was that the regional district model be revamped so that areas such as Shawnigan could maybe have a satellite office with a dedicated planner, maybe the dedicated bylaw enforcement as well. But that fell on deaf ears. So
yeah, there's a definite disconnect there. Sorry, Bernie.
I was just going to say, the problem with the CVRD is staff provides directions and the directors listen to staff, and it should be the other way around.
This is a lesson for us all in terms of how to increase communication in order to really be all on the same page.
So is there no way that we can influence these directors? Can we invite them to a talk like this and present our concerns again and present the recommendations of the conservation plan or of the new plan that you're making right now?
One mechanism that is available to us, and we've used it before, is we can have delegations. So when you have the Electoral Area Services Committee, the EASC, which is basically all the board of directors are at that meeting. You can have a delegation, which I think you're allocated 15 minutes, so we can, put together a PowerPoint presentation, and usually you would want to speak to an issue that's being brought up on the agenda. So we don't know what's on the agenda, probably, I guess, 3 weeks out. I don't know exactly. I have to ask Cliff, but he can identify when they're going to be talking about, say, Taylor Park, and then we could have a delegation that talks to the value of that park, the riparian values and the riparian area regulation. We could, that's one mechanism that we could do, is collectively we could get together and present to the CVRD.
I may be mistaken, Dave, but I think you can have a delegation on a topic that's not, it's speaking to the directors. That 3-minute talk, that has to be on an item on the agenda.
But the delegation doesn't have to be, is that?
I may be mistaken, but
I think you're right, Bernie, because I've seen delegations that are on off topic. You're right.
Yeah.
So if we want to exercise our voice, that would be one way to do it. And then we just get, whoever wants to could get invited to the Zoom meeting. They basically have a waiting room and they let you in for the delegation presentation, and then they basically let you out at the end. So.
And I would suggest that since the Basin Society and various directors have spoken multiple times at the CVRD, it would be more powerful if the Rotary Club gave a presentation along this line, because then it's another voice.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems to me that we need more and more voices and more different
Agreed.
institutions banding together to create more awareness, create more momentum, for sure.
At this time, I'd like to thank everyone who's contributed to the discussion. We'll wrap up the recording with just a reminder of where to find more information. So let me share my screen for purposes of the recording.
If I could make an announcement before.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Bernie.
Tomorrow I have organized a tour of Wildwood Eco Forest, and the tour will be led by Barry Gates, who's a very knowledgeable eco-forester. The tour starts at 10 o'clock at the Eco Forest, and if anybody's interested, they can contact me, and I'll give them the information about the location and time of the tour.
Wonderful, Bernie. If you could put your email in the chat, that would help us all. So here is our website, which has our upcoming events, but there's also a green button you can see right on our landing page that takes you to the cleanup. We have a number of documents here, including any details that you'd like to send to other interested groups. You can click on this green button, and that has a PDF with all of our contact information and the step-by-step details of this event. But I've committed to sending you one personally, Dave, so don't worry.
Okay, good.
And I'd like to also acknowledge our guests have been ever so kind to include us on their website, as Steve mentioned, so you can see that we are Canada's first Eco Club, now accepting new members, and especially people from the Basin Society with your background, knowledge, and heart for our ecosystems and the conservation plan moving forward. And lastly, Rotary is also committed to helping everyday citizens become more involved in stewarding their environment. And so I invite you to visit ifixtheplanet.com as well as esreg.org, because recently we were able to present about Shawnigan Lake to an international audience and to explain to them what community volunteers can do to actively steward their environment. So thank you very much, everyone. And I will stop screen sharing and just invite those watching the recording to visit our website at shawniganrotaryecoclub.ca for more information. Thank you.